Hello, I'm Dr. Basil Constantine. I'm here from the Online Writing Center, and now we're going to be talking about writing about moral dilemmas. This is an important part of decision making because in conflicts, whether workplace, personal, corporate, intergovernmental, there's often no one thing that everyone agrees is the right course of action. And so whether you are looking at this as someone who's involved in resolution, if you're being asked to take sides by friends or something else, it is good to be able to articulate how you reach your decisions and how you come to peace with what happens. So we're working our way through the semester, so we're going to gloss through the normal introductory material. You can watch just about any of our other webinars, and we'll talk in more detail about how to make an appointment through my.acu.edu, about the different appointment types you can make, asynchronous, where you upload a copy of your paper when we send you email within 24 hours, or a real-time phone or Zoom appointment where you can talk with us and ask questions back and forth. See any of our other webinars for that. Some things that you might be interested in coming up, we are talking about problems of practice in one of our webinars next week. That's the EDD in progress from assessment to problem of practice. Also going to be talking about film analysis next week. And then coming up the week after that, we have another webinar tying in with the conflict management program about how to write out your argument for a bargaining strategy using the no tiers plan for paragraph writing. And the week after that, we have an installment of our ever-popular Beyond Summary, adding analysis and synthesis to your writing. With that, let's look at the main focus today, which is going to be a tie-in with the CONR program. Now, if you go to our webinar page, where we have not just a calendar, but a complete archive of all the webinars we offer, there is after the calendar set, there's this tab guide where you can select the program that you're enrolled in this case CONR, and see all of the courses that have webinar tie-ins. So that is a huge time saver. We update that throughout the term, so as soon as a webinar recording goes online, we update the course catalog there, that tab guide, and you can always find it by searching for the course number as well. So our first objective is going to be to understand the sample assignment that we're going to be discussing today, the CONR 638, Week 3 or Module 3, Assignment Number 1, Making Good Decisions, Ethical Egoism and Kenosis. After that, we're going to talk about how to ground a reflection, to not just talk about something, but to make sure it is supported through a multiplicity of evidence, and that you are citing the literature and anecdote or personal experience, if you can, to buttress and support your art. We'll finish with our normal outline and drafting, so let's go ahead and dive in. So, CONR 630, this is coming from the Ethics and Conflict Resolution course, and the instructions begin with a brief overview saying, here's the reading to do, so that's from the main course textbook, or one of the two main course textbooks. Read Chapter 2, and read a related article about the concept of kenosis. And during the paper, you're asked to discuss when it is appropriate to use ethical egoism to inform your decision-making, and when you should be using ethical kenosis. And specifically, there needs to be a moral dilemma, something where a decision has to be made and there's some stakes to it. It's not, what will I have for breakfast? Will I have the Cheerios or the Rice Krispies, where it's just a matter of preference. There's an actual dilemma, some stakes to make this important. Specifically, you need to write a 500 to 800 word reflection paper about egoism and kenosis and the roles that they play in making good decisions. So what does that mean? Well, 500 to 800 pages is going to be right around 2 full body pages, so not counting cover page or title page, not counting the references, 2 to about 3 1/4 pages of main text. And there's a recommendation or requirement that you tie in the ideas from the discussion. Now, the discussion is rather similar, so I would be surprised if you didn't. But that is, again, reminding you that you're not writing the discussion and just for nothing. It's designed to feed into this assignment. And then, specifically, some parameters for the paper. So, reflect on the following questions and provide responses in a paper. So this is saying specific content you must have. Include the question prompts in your paper. All right, so that's telling you have those questions as headings. Now, normally we wouldn't have questions in the headings. We wouldn't have the punctuation like a question mark there. But the instructor is saying to do it, so we treat this as a house rule. So you'll include the questions as the headings. You'll want to format them in title case, as you do for all your headings in APA 7. And, all right, what are our questions to consider? Well, first up, is egoism just the way it is? Or, as ethicists argue, is it the way things should be? And is kenosis, this giving up of yourself, some would say self-sacrifice, is it a reasonable and realistic potential for humans? And how should Christians specifically respond to moral dilemmas? Is egoism ever appropriate, or is kenosis even plausible for us? So those are some big questions, and you're not going to answer them just on your own. As instructions say, we should be reading the literature and citing the literature. And if we check the paper specs, we have the name, the word count, okay, in the upper left-hand corner, so that's a house rule, so we want to make sure that gets added. Beyond that, format and cite using APA style, and especially check your writing using Grammarly. So that's a reminder that strong writing is needed for this assignment, and one of the tools to help you do that, to catch some basic errors, is to use Grammarly. Grammarly isn't perfect, it won't catch everything, but it is another tool that you have to get feedback quickly. Alright, and if we review the rubric, we essentially get an outline of the paper. That it should start with an introduction. You won't have a heading for that because APA rules say don't have a heading for that's called introduction. We know the start of the paper is the introduction. Then, is egoism the way it is or the way it should be? Is kenosis a reasonable and realistic human response? And look at the points that those get. So those are getting 30% each, so these should be substantial sections. And then, what is the role of ego and or kenosis in Christian responses to moral dilemmas, i.e. doing the right thing? That's also 30%. And then a conclusion. Now, if we compare this with the slide 2 back, if we look at these questions here, we see that they're not quite the same. They're certainly related, but not quite the same. And looking at the difference, so the first bullet is more or less identical with the second row in this rubric table. The second bullet is also pretty much a match for that one. However, if we look at this, how should Christians respond to moral dilemmas? Is egoism ever appropriate? Is kenosis plausible? Well, that's kind of a more detailed set of sub-questions to the larger question that we have here in that fourth row of the table. And that's a helpful guide because that gives you a way of organizing things into subsections while still seeing what is the overall thing that ties this together. So we'll come back to that after we talk a little bit about how to ground reflections. And one way to understand how to write a really strong reflection is to make sure that you have both applied and abstract explorations. What do we mean by applied? Well, think of an example of when things might come into play. Are there, for example, situations in your own life where you have had or could imagine having this dilemma? What are the stakes? What's going on here? What happens if you don't do anything, or if you pick one decision versus the other? What are the consequences or benefits? And for something in your own life, how did you feel? how would you have felt if you did something different? Or if it's a hypothetical, how do you think you would feel from picking one thing over the other? And are the consequences important to you or to other people? You might make a decision that other people are aghast at, or that you might make a decision that's very important to you, but less consequential to others. And does that affect what and how you decide? For abstract, well, you might contextualize it as, okay, so what if you were programming a machine to do something? What should happen, or what do you believe should happen, if a machine was making the decisions, or if a computer programmer was making a program that would decide based on preset criteria? And should decisions be fixed or pre-designed? Can we say, well, this is what should always happen? And does or should something like guilt factor into decisions? And a great way to ground this discussion is to have a scenario, a case study, if you will, where you describe something and then you explain what different authors would say to do, what you yourself believe, what you think you should decide, and some ways to consider that to start crafting this is to ask first, okay, what is the decision that needs to be made? And don't just think that to yourself. Put that in your paper. Write down what the decision is. What are the stakes? Are there consequences to inaction? These two are tightly grouped. And in one of the videos for this module, they talk about the consequences of inaction, which are usually greater than if you act. And who has responsibility here and why? And does that affect things? We don't normally hold babies responsible for things that the adults do. You don't really expect the baby to intervene and stop them. But does it matter if the person is older, if they're higher ranking, if they're officially responsible for something? Those may or may not be things that are important to you, that affect your thoughts about who should act. And then we can take this back to the literature. Well, what do different writers say? Is there a consensus between them or disagreement? If there is a consensus, do you personally agree with that? Or, if there's not a consensus, do you agree with either position? Do you feel that one of these sides belongs to you? And then, considering all of these things, how should you act? So at this point, I would recommend that we first review some of the sources that we're going to be using in this paper. So if we look back at the syllabus, we get most of the information we need here to have our references and citations, but there's some more information that we need, and the formatting's not quite aligned. So for example, the ISBN number that tells us exactly which edition of the book, that's very helpful to have if you're ordering the book. But in APA style, it is not included in the references entry. Similarly, we have a little punctuation to change, some information that would move around, some different formatting. And so we go from this to looking at it and saying, all right, we need to do some abbreviation, need to reformat, move around. And so we end up with, at the bottom, you can see you need to add a comma before the ampersand when listing the author names. The title should be in sentence case and italics. We don't include the city and state, we don't include the ISBN, and then there's a particular format that APA style abbreviates and formats edition information. All right, so with the Donsel article, we have a link here to the article itself. Now, if we go ahead and look at the first page there, it actually tells us a lot of the information that we need. We've got the title, we've got the last name and the initials, we've got the name of the publication. The journal is Zygon, the volume 39, number 4. It's published in 2004. We don't include the month. The first page is 791. We just go to the back of the PDF to find, oh, it ends on page 800. Note that we do not include the SJ. So S period J period stands for Society of Jesus. So this author happens to be a Jesuit priest. But we don't include titles, we don't include degrees in the reference. we just include the last name and then the first and middle initials. And then in the citations and signal phrases, just the last name and the publication year. All right, now there's also this video here that's mentioned here is Michael Sandel's Justice. What's the right thing to do? And this is an interesting one because it is an opportunity to explore the difference when we are citing a YouTube video. Because if we're looking on YouTube, you'll see the gray box here. We have some information. And it's the name of the channel, Harvard University, which would go as the author. And whatever they have as the title there, Justice, What's the Right Thing to Do, Episode 01, The Moral Side of Murder, we take that as the title for the video. But there's some reformatting involved. So Harvard University gets listed as the author. It claim corporate or organizational authorship for their channel. For a YouTube video, we would include the year and the month and the day of the month. And then that title, we take all the text, but we reformat it in sentence case, italicize it, include after that in square brackets video, after that the name of the platform, YouTube, and then a link to the video. And you just cite it as Harvard University 2009. Now you're probably not going to use the signal phrase Harvard University parentheses 2009 because that it's Harvard, or its YouTube channel is actually not important here. So you could say Michael Sandel parentheses Harvard University, 2009. That's fine. That's a way to identify the speaker without having to confuse Harvard University as the speaker itself. All right. Now for the next step, you're going to want a copy of the APA course paper template. So if you're watching this on video, just go ahead to your web browser and type in tinyurl.com/ACU template. So I have here a copy of our APA course paper template here. And you can go ahead and fill in your information here. Before we do anything else, we want to make sure that we tend to a special house rule that was mentioned in the instructions. So if we look back at the slides and we look at the instructions right at the end, right before the rubric, we'll see that there is a house rule note. Put the name and word count in the upper left-hand corner of the page. Okay, best time to do that now before we forget. So, let's see. We have the name, and it says name, so I'm going to go ahead and put my last name only. And then to help make sure that I remember to do this, to take care of this, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to highlight that so I have that visual reminder that I need to fill that in. Alright, so you can fill in the title here. Whatever it is going to be, make sure it matches the title here on the top of page 2. And at this point I'm going to go ahead and delete these placeholders here so that we're looking at a blank document. I'm also going to go ahead and delete the placeholder references here, which show you different examples of how to format references. And for good measure, because I know with some satisfaction that we're going to be citing those different sources that we discussed earlier, I'm going to go ahead and add those now. Now, you can copy these from the visual examples, you can create them originally, whatever works. I'm just going to go ahead and copy my own earlier example here, because by copy and pasting that, I helped ensure that it is as I intended it. Now I'm deleting some spaces that were there just for PowerPoint. You see we have this hanging indent with the first line after the original one. So the second line total is bumped in 1/2 inch. That is how it should be. So we've got the Theroux source, Theroux and Kreisman. Our next one up, we have the Donsel article. All right. That should go before that. And again, just removing some spaces that are there for PowerPoint's benefit. And you might ask, why is this capitalized like this? The answer is, if something is being treated as a proper noun, as it's functioning as a proper noun, like the creator, not just someone who creates things, but God, and the created co-creator, in this case, that's referring to Jesus, then as a proper noun, we would capitalize that. So that's creator and created co-creator. Those of you who are familiar with the APA rules on prefixes may know that normally you wouldn't hyphenate that, but we're reproducing the title of the article, so it's how it was hyphenated in that article. All right, we've got one more source to add for now, the Michael Sandel video. That's the one on Harvard's YouTube channel. So H going after D and before T, that will go there. There we are. All right, so we've got our 3 references that we're expecting to use here. In APA style, you should only be referencing things that you've cited. So we'll need to make sure that all 3 get used there, but that shouldn't be a problem. They are rather central to this paper. All right, so continuing through this, if we just go ahead and grab the instructions for this assignment, if we just copy and paste, the font isn't quite right, the formatting, it doesn't quite align, so look for this little clipboard button after you've pasted and select Match Destination Formatting. And that will immediately make things look much more as they should with the template. Now, the next thing that happens is a matter of preference for how exactly you do it. I prefer to go ahead and black these out, to mark them with black highlighter, so that I don't get distracted by things that I don't need to be looking at when when planning out what should be in this paper. So same thing with this. You can say, okay, 500 to 800, then covering that somewhere else. I can black that out as well, right? So I see the instructions right about the role of egoism and kenosis in making good decisions. Okay. Now for plotting this out, looking at this here, see, okay, I don't really need to look at this here. In fact, I'm going to just delete that. So I have this as my guide here. Now I can take this thing that starts as bullet, and if I apply the APA Level 1 heading, you can see I'm on the home part of the ribbon, APA Level 1, it becomes centered. Now I also need it to be in title case, because that's how headings are formatted in APA 7th edition. So any word with 3 or more letters, that is a so-called important word, meaning a noun, a pronoun, an adjective, an adverb, and a couple others, should have the first letter capitalized. Now, or, as, the, no. But ethicist, yeah, that's a noun. Argue, that's a verb. It, that's a pronoun. Is, that's a verb. Way, noun. It, pronoun. S, should, that's 4 more letters. And B, that's a verb. Alright, so that is now reformatted as a heading. This one, I again will apply the AP Level 1 style, and now I need to go in and format those according to title case rules. And as I said earlier, you wouldn't normally have a question mark there, but because your professor has included in the instructions saying that that should be done, we should keep that. Now here's a point where I'm going to go back and look at that rubric. As you may recall, the rubric has a slightly different thing than the instructions, where the third bullet in the instructions has 3 distinct questions, and this has more of an overarching question to encompass those 3. So this will make a great heading over the other three. So we're going to go ahead and copy that from the rubric, paste that here, and in this case I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to apply the AP Level 1 style. Look what happens to the font. We'll just fix that typo in the original text. And now we're going to need to convert this to title case. What is the role of ego and or kenosis in Christian responses to moral dilemmas? Alright, so now that we have that, we can look at these three things and say, okay, these are sub-questions, questions that should be answered as part of this larger section. So let's make these APA Level 2 headings, subheadings of that. And then, of course, go ahead and convert those to title case. And so now we have an idea of the big picture that's tying this section together. And you can start each section with a direct answer. It'll be a shorter answer, but a direct answer to each of the questions being asked. So for example, here you know that this is going to start very simple and directly. Kenosis is or is not a reasonable and realistic potential for humans. And you might have some slightly different wording, but this is the idea. You know, this is a yes-no question. So yes, it is, or no, it is not. And so you probably, after doing the reading, have a idea for which one you're going to use. Let's say that you are going to use is not. So we cross out the is. Okay, kenosis is not a reasonable and realistic potential for humans. Okay, so the immediate answer is going to be, the immediate follow-up is going to be why. And then, so if you are planning this out before you revisit these sources or read them for the first time, perhaps, you know that, okay, you've got your response and then you're going to have to back it up. So give us some reasons. And that the why could be answered in the abstract. It could be answered through anecdote or hypothetical situation. And, you know, tell us what you feel and plan this out. But by making this list of things that you're going to be writing about and having this in hand as you do the reading, you will see things that fall into this that you want to cite, you want to summarize, that you want to sometimes disagree with or respond to through anecdotes. And by asking those questions that we're looking at in these slides, those questions for how do you ground your discussion? Are there situations in your own life where you read and you say, okay, and this kind of situation, like, oh, I remember something like that. Well, just go ahead and put that in your outline. And then explain what was going on. Okay, what are the stakes? And how would or did you feel? In fact, let's go ahead and do that right now. So, for example, if I'm telling an anecdote about a time where I was asked to choose between things, let's say you are going to fly home for the holidays, and there's one ticket on the flight, and the person behind you says, "Oh, I'm sorry, my mother is dying. Could I possibly get that ticket? Would you mind giving me your place in line?" Well, if you are being, surrendering the self, as Kenosis describes, I would guess that you would give them your ticket. Now, if you were, say, going to visit your own family for things, and you weren't sure how long your, let's say, your parents would be alive, that's not something that's neat. Well, hold on. Is it better to give it up to them versus seeing your own family? Well, that's going to depend on some things. So tell us, what were the stakes? If you were yourself going to see your dying parent, then you might say, well, hold on, there's some really imminent harm that may result if I were to be selfless and give it up. I'd be hurting my own family. Or, if there was not a certainty, but just a likelihood, say, okay, well, does their imminent, or what they believe is imminent, outweigh my lack of certainty? And I don't know what answer you will have there, but those are certainly the stakes. What did you do, or would you do, if it's as hypothetical, and how do you feel about that? How did you actually feel? And how does that tie into your argument about, is kenosis reasonable and realistic? And you might say, well, it's not realistic, but we should still try. Or you might say, it's not realistic, that's for God. God can do that, we can't. I don't know which position you'll choose, but that's something you can be arguing here. And filling this out as you read and have internal responses to the reading, well, write about it here and keep those questions in mind. All right, I think we are coming near the end of our time here, so this is a good occasion to do a wrap-up. So we reviewed the assignment, the week 3 assignment for CONR 638, which is about writing about decision-making and grounding this discussion with reflection. So we discussed the assignment, which does have a couple house rule things, like having your name and word count in the upper left-hand corner, and having headings that are specifically reproducing in questions that were asked in the instructions. All right. We talked about different ways of grounding your reflections through applied examples and abstract principles, or discussing the abstract principles and how they do or do not overlap. And when you're discussing a scenario, ask yourself, okay, what needs or needed to be made? What are the stakes? Are there consequences if you do nothing? And who has responsibility and why? So, for example, if you were in that airport situation again, what if it was a very short flight? So, for example, let's say that you were in Boston and you were going to Cape Cod. That is something where you could fly. Or, if you had the means, you could drive down and take the ferry and get there anyway. Or suggest that the other person do that. So, there may not be just one alternative, and that may change how you feel about it. May make the stakes less, and say, well, it'd be convenient for you to do that, but actually it's going to be another hour, and, or you could say, look, I'm just not going to engage. It's not in my control here. And, choose to not take action. But whatever it is, write about it, because decisions like this are very personal, and there's not one right answer. But you do want to understand how you make your decisions and to come to peace, to understand and agree with the decisions you make. And of course, ground these things with reference to the literature. How do your thoughts agree or disagree, diverge or converge? All right, make sure to get those citations in for all the works that you cite. There are other ones that you could potentially do, but these are the main ones for this particular weekend module. And if you have other questions, feel free to send us an email at onlinewritingcenter@acu.edu and sign up for an appointment to get feedback on your draft. And you can find the videos for this and other webinars on the Online Writing Center website. Have a good evening, everyone.